Parker Abramowitz. So my dad's side of the family is entirely Jewish as far as we can trace back, so probably since antiquity, if not farther than that. Yelling at me the histories and the inventions of series of processes. You could say the Industrial Revolution, you could say the Agricultural Revolution, and it's gone from 1910, I think we're in the mid-80s right now, it's the middle of World War III, 150-page Google Docs.
Yeah.
It's like a thought experiment in a way. It's a way for me to write about something that I'm very interested in. Let's see what happens if it continues and snowballs and snowballs and snowballs. Look at this weird story a 17-year-old wrote during his free time and be like, let's publish this book because we're going to make money off of it.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Danville Spotlight. My name is Kushan Harandi and I'm joined here today by
Parker Abramowitz.
So Parker, tell me a little bit about your story.
Oh, that's a very big question. So I'm 17. I'm a human. I live in Danville, California. I've lived here for 7 years, almost to the day, I think. Yeah, almost 8 years maybe? 2016, June? Yeah, that'll be 8 years. Damn, that's a long time. I used to live in Australia. I lived there for 4.5 years. I lived in Sydney. My parents are American. Yeah, I'm Jewish. That's a very big part of who I am. I'm very interested in history. That's kind of the field that I'm very interested in. I want to go into. I want to go into politics and even in policy making, things like that in my future. I have a little brother, 2 dogs. Yeah.
That's a very cool story, of course. So is your whole family Jewish? How did you become Jewish?
So my dad's side of the family is entirely Jewish as far as we can trace back, so probably since antiquity, if not farther than that. My mom's family is not Jewish. My mom converted to Judaism when she married my father, so she's Jewish, but her mother isn't, her brother isn't, her dad wasn't, just my dad's family, and my dad's family's scattered across the entire world. I've got family in Australia, in South Africa, in the UK, in Israel, in Canada, across the US, all these different countries. So it's part of the Ashkenazi story.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So like you obviously love history. So when did you start loving history first? Like when was it sprouted?
So I could probably pin it down. I actually pin it down to a specific day. So we went out for dinner one night, and as we came home, it was probably like 9:30. I was like, I'm gonna go just finish some things up on my computer that I was doing right before. This was like 7th grade maybe. And so I sit down, I was watching a YouTube video, and this ad came up for Civilization 6, which is a video game set in history. It's like a strategy game. It's something I've played a lot as of now. But the ad was like, Epic Games is selling the game for free right now. You can go get it. So I'm like, oh, that looks kind of cool. So I go and download it, and then I stop playing it, I fall in love with the game, and I fall down the rabbit hole of learning about the different countries in the game, learning about the different leaders in the game. What does this thing do? What's a correlation to real life and all those different things? And then I fell down the rabbit hole of reading history books, playing more history-based video games, and things like that. And obviously it was very much helped by taking great history classes in school, whether that's Mr. Melvin and whether that's been Mr. Davis.
That's right. And those classes were obviously very fun to take. So like obviously you do know a lot about history and different countries and everything like that, but so like personally, what do you think the most significant thing in history was and why?
So like in a specific event, as much as I have the Davis in the back of my head yelling at me the histories and the inventions of series of processes, but there's so many different things. You could say the Industrial Revolution, you could say the Agricultural Revolution, you could say even the French Revolution to a certain extent, because that was the foundation of what we call today as a modern nation state, the foundation of we are one country, we are one people with one government, and there's not this sort of patchwork of little principalities or anything. And the head of the government is the one who controls the government, and the government controls the state, and the state is the country. You don't see that kind of thing before the French Revolution, but you also the Industrial Revolution is one of the most important moments in all of history, the way that it transformed the entire world, even though it may not have reached parts of the world until a lot later. The fact that the Europeans were able to get such a technological leg up against literally everyone else, it allowed them to conquer everything they wanted to and basically plant a flag in everyone's back garden. and that had such massive ramifications as well as the fact that it allowed us more complex machinery and foodstuffs and things like that, to where before the Industrial Revolution, the population of Earth was maybe 1 billion total, and in the last 200 years, it's gone up by a factor of 8, I guess, to 8 billion.
Yeah, around 8.
And it's still climbing to this day.
Yeah.
Also, the agricultural revolution and the almost, you could say, the founding of civilization itself, because before that you don't have sedentary groups of people. People don't stay in one place. They're more migratory. There's no farming, but with the foundation of agriculture and farming around 7,000 BC-ish, in both the Indus River in what is now Pakistan, India, as well as the Tigris and Euphrates in Iraq, as well as even the Yangtze in China and all these, Nile, and all these other places allowed for big, not quite centralized, but centralized for the time, I suppose, civilizations with governments to form and then slowly grow into what we became today. Like, without agriculture, we have none of this.
Yeah.
Humanity, like, for 95% of human history, we were tribal, I guess, is, for lack of a better term, is what human civilization was. But only in the last 10,000 years or so, we've gone from sticks and stones to agriculture to whatever we have today, to where we've been able to send probes out almost beyond the solar system.
Right, yeah. And I think definitely, like, the Industrial Revolution does have something to do with it. We were able to produce food more and faster, so we can support our population. And I think that was pretty important. Yeah. So I remember you always speaking to me about a novel that you wrote. And I'm kind of interested. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So I've loved to write since I was very young. I remember even in elementary school, I'd be like, my friends and I, even in like second grade, we would get together. We'd write all these little stories. We were into dinosaur sets. We primarily wrote about. We would like show them off to our class. We'd do our own little illustrations. We'd come up with the plot, all this kind of stuff. And so that's kind of carried on. But to pair with my interest in history is also interest in video games, and I was playing a Hearts of Iron 4 save with usually Hearts of Iron 4 is a World War II strategy game, but it was modded, so it was a World War I game. I was playing as France because that's one of my favorite countries to play in video games, and I have a weird attachment to France. And I'm like, this is kind of fun. I should write about this and create this whole kind of universe about it. And I don't even really have a name for it, and so I started writing. And it's gone from 1910, I think we're in the mid-80s right now, it's middle of World War III. I've gone all throughout military history, different wars, the development of military technology, things like that, politics, with a specific focus on France, what's going on around France, and making France the most overpowered country in the entire story. So that's what it's about. It's expanded so far beyond that. I've written a whole bunch of pages about the history of sports in France at this point. So yeah.
So, like, of course, like, writing has a big factor to this, and you love writing, but like, people who love writing don't really just go on and write really long novels.
Yeah, 150-page Google Docs.
Yeah, about that. So like, why was like the real reason you just found it interesting?
Why? Because it's a way for me to it's like a thought experiment in a way. It's a way for me to write about something that I'm very interested in, keep me busy when I'm bored in class, because that's when I primarily write. And it's a way to think about how, this would be an interesting way if history had gone in this direction. That's kind of the whole thing with the alternate history genre as a whole. That's why it exists. It's like, well, what would have happened had this changed, and what are the ramifications of that? Granted, what I've written is very much not very realistic, but it's just a way for me to exercise my thoughts about, well, this is interesting, I like this, let's see what happens if it continues and snowballs and snowballs and snowballs.
Right. And obviously it's very long, 150 pages, but are your thoughts of maybe publishing in the near future, or like sharing your story, because obviously your impact towards, you can have a huge impact towards like younger minds, and how like your version of history would be, or like it, obviously like your different alternative. So do you think about publishing it, or?
The thought has crossed my mind before, it wouldn't be very easy to get it published, and there's probably a long process. I don't know much about how books get published, but there's oftentimes secondary companies and publishers and things like that. No publisher in their right mind is going to look at this weird story a 17-year-old wrote during his free time and be like, let's publish this book because we're going to make money off of it. That's not realistic. What will happen is maybe I self-publish it or something like that, or I pay a freelancer online to get like a proper hardcover copy of it, and I just have that one copy. But yeah, maybe I would think about publishing. It'd be a lot of fun. It's nowhere near finished, and it's kind of incoherent. There's not very many characters. It's mostly just about general themes or specific events that are happening throughout the timeline of 20th century history.
And do you think that this story has an ability to have an impact on people? Like, if someone were to read it, do you think it could impact the way a person sees history or a person's life or anything?
I think potentially, that's not what it's meant for, but I think any piece of literature, whether it's, that's a weird example that I was going to go for, the Communist Manifesto or this, can have an impact on the way someone thinks. And even my incoherent ramblings about French military aircraft in this story could definitely change the way someone thinks about how military equipment is supposed to work. How can synergies between equipment work? How can tactics evolve? What about political developments? Well, I know this is an alternate history, but what if this person in this alternate history did something else? How would that change the timeline? And it's, again, just kind of an interesting thought experiment that I think can change the way people think about alternate history and things like that, even if it is kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right. And just diving towards like the beginning of your book. So you started around 1910. Like, explain how it started.
So the start was based off of that Heart of Iron 4 game where I was like, oh, I'm playing as France. France didn't do so hot in the first few months of World War One. They tried to invade some German territory and it went atrociously wrong. And then they lost several 100,000 men in what's called the Battle of the Frontiers as Germany invaded through Belgium. It took what's called the Miracle on the Meuse in September of 1914 to stop the German advance to Paris, and then that commenced a whole other process of the race to the sea, where the Germans, the British, the Belgians, and the French parried off of each other as they kept trying to outflank each other until they reached, I guess, northern Belgium and what is the North Sea. But so in the story, or in the video game, what happened is I invaded Alsace and I did it successfully. So I'm like, oh, this is cool. Maybe I should write about this. And I did a whole bunch of other things with the structure of my army and a whole bunch of other stuff in the video game. And then as I started writing, I'm like, okay, we can start with that. So the French, the big starting point is the French are able to modernize their army, effectively modernize their tactics in preparation for what is World War One, which is a hellscape of trench warfare and machine guns and artillery and all that stuff. So they prepare for that. They build bigger artillery guns. They establish better attacking tactics. They invest more in motorized vehicles and things like that. And because of that, they're able to do better against the Germans. They win the war quicker, and with that, it snowballs into France becoming a more France's foreign policy, which is in the 1920s and 1930s, was much more cautionary. It was about preventing Germany from expanding, but as it slowly went to the 30s, and you get appeasement, you get allowing Germany to annex Austria, you get the Sudetenland deal with the Czechs. But in this different world, France establishes a much more solid alliance with Poland and Czechia, as well as Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and Romania, which allows the French to establish a proper bulwark against both Soviet aggression from the east, as well as German aggression and rearming, as well as Hungarian aggression, because they got bored and needed to write a war. And then as World War II begins, France is in a far better economic position than they were in the real time. They modernized the military effectively, they built a proper air force, established proper tank divisions and tank tactics, and this allows France to better defeat Germany in World War II, and then it consistently just snowballs into the Cold War, and you get things like a slightly different Arab-Israeli war. You get a NATO that's this border pushes all the way into Poland. You get France being the ones to nuke Japan.
That's very, very, very alternative timeline. I mean, so like this this story is mostly Eurocentric, right?
Oh, extremely
So-
Eurocentric.
Did you end up mentioning USA a lot, or like
So
was it a key part?
in World War One, I can't remember why I did this. I guess I just was feeling vindictive towards the British on whatever particular day, because the Brits don't enter the war at any point in World War One, but the Americans do eventually enter the war. And I would pull up
1917?
in 1917 or 1916.
Yeah.
After the Dimmerman telegram. So the Americans enter the war. They're actually kind of crucial. They provide supplementary forces because opposite time France had a population of maybe 45 million, I want to say. Germany had a population closer to 70 million. So there's a bit of a population disparity there. So the Americans come in, they help. They win the war, they do very well. In World War II, the Americans don't really join on the Western Front because ultimately the Western Front is pretty much closed by 1943. The Polish invasion of Germany, the invasion of Poland by Germany is defeated. The French then invade Germany into the Rhineland. They cross the Rhine. It's a whole thing. And the U.S. then gets Pearl Harbor because Japan is doing whatever Japan is doing.
But then France ends up.
France and Japan had already been at war at that point. France had been helping the Chinese against the Japanese, and there had been skirmishes in Indochina, which was French controlled at the time. So in 1942, the French and the U.S. Defeat the Japanese in a series of naval battles, and then together there's a combined invasion of like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and then eventually, with the two of them work very well together, and then they end up nuking Japan. Later on, throughout the Cold War, the U.S. is mentioned as a brief war in Vietnam, but because in this world China doesn't become communist, it's not as big of a thing. The war in Vietnam, it's just America, France, and then also the Chinese putting down the communist revolt pretty quickly. The Americans helped support Israel in a lot of in the Arab-Israeli wars, along with the French, the Americans, and then once World War III comes, because I got bored and wanted to write another war, and it's kind of the climax of the whole thing.
So so you're inching towards the present day. Obviously, you're in the 1980s by now.
Yeah.
But does the Soviet Union rise? Like, what does the Cold War look like, and how does that lead to?
The Soviet Union is far weaker because there is no Eastern Bloc. The borders of the Soviet Union go, I guess, into what today we would call up until about Western Ukraine and Belarus and things like that. They do end up taking the Baltics at some point, but they don't ever take Poland. So Poland is like actually huge. It's super weird. Because after World War II, because Poland got invaded and the Soviets got the eastern part of Poland because they made a deal with the Germans, Poland ended up taking a whole bunch of German territory known as Pomerania, East Prussia, and Silesia, and then ended up deporting all the Germans out of there and moving all the Poles from the east there. So Poland just kind of moved. But in this world, Poland doesn't move. It takes a lot of the same territories it did after World War II, but also keeps all of its eastern territory, so it's bigger. I would probably say it's a richer country because of communism, and communism isn't very good at making its people rich. But the Soviets are weaker, they have a weaker economy, they're weaker politically, they don't have very many allies. I did make Italy go communist, I can't remember why, but I did. So Italy are communist, so is Hungary.
That's a switch.
And then Syria and Egypt after the Yom Kippur War, instead of Egypt moving away from the Soviet Union after the Yom Kippur War, they move closer towards the Soviet Union. There's a whole conflict there where the Muslim Brotherhood takes control of Egypt, and then eventually an Islamist government takes control of Egypt. Same in Syria, so Syria and Egypt are both very much in the Soviet sphere of influence. I would mention Iran. I haven't written much about them. Probably should, considering there's a lot of stuff happened in Iran in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
I can tell you one thing. Actually, no, I did mention the Iran-Iraq War. That did happen. I'll go through it in there.
80s.
Yeah, that was like most of the 80s.
Yeah.
But yeah, so far in World War III, the Soviets aren't doing so hot. But U.S. is doing pretty well.
This is doing pretty good.
U.S. is doing pretty well, yeah.
Nice.
Japan's there. Japan's not communist. Basically, it's what if you made NATO supremely overpowered in the 80s and then had them go to war with the Soviets at the same time. So I suppose from a political standpoint, the Soviets would be a lot more scarred by Stalin because they never ended up getting involved in World War II. They never learned the lessons of World War II with don't meddle in the military, the economy isn't somewhat reformed, and a lot more happens, and the purges happen, but they're a lot more intense because there's no reason for them to really stop because the German threat isn't as substantial. So I think the Soviet Union is a lot weaker, also economically, because the Stalin's push for industrialization is a lot harder, and agriculture is destroyed a lot more. So eventually they do industrialize, but not to the same effectiveness as they would have if they had done it on a slow process like they did a little bit in real life.
Have you been working on it this summer at all, or?
No, I actually haven't. I've been cooking some other proper actual novels in my head that I've been thinking about writing. That's what I've been starting on this summer.
Different ones.
Yeah, completely. It is somewhat alternate history, but it's a little bit more fantastical, and it's set in like 70 CE rather than what's close to the modern day. But I have thought about doing a lot more. So because the World War III part of the book is the climax, I've written it a lot more in detail than I have most of the other wars. So it's on a completely separate dock, and I started out by writing, going front by front. So I think I went from the Polish and Lithuanian front to the Ukrainian front, down all the way to the Sinai fronts and the Golan fronts, as well as Japan and Italy and Hungary and all these other stuff. But I went day by day for a long part of the whole thing, and I'm like, this is gonna take freaking forever. So then I'm going week by week now. I think we're like 3 or 4 weeks into the war. I'm planning it to be about 10 to 12 weeks. I have a whole outline, so
nice.
Yeah,
it's really organized.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised. I'm like, it's probably good to find an ending point because I've been writing this for 3.5 years. I started like freshman year, I want to say, because I was bored, or I told you why I started, but I also was very bored. And it was something that I'd write in Access, or I'd write in class if I was finished with my work or something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And obviously, I mean, this is a big part of. You can say it's a big part of your life. And
I could, yeah.
Yeah. So, would you like write about it as you're applying for college, or like just write about your love for history?
It's actually not a bad idea. I haven't thought about putting that in college apps, but considering I have a lot of that stuff to do, it's not a bad idea to write about this and how I'm. As a 17-year-old, I have I think I have an understanding of complex political subjects and things like that. Considering I want to go study international relations and political science and things like that, so that'd be a pretty good thing to put on an application.
Right. And leading to this final question, what is your advice for people who don't really know much about history and who want to learn more about it and take like these sort of rigorous classes, like AP classes such as World, Euro, or US history?
I think you have to try and find a piece of history that interests you. I found mine pretty quickly, and that's being largely French or Jewish history, or just European military history in general. You find that and you're like, oh, this is super interesting, I like this, let me dive in and learn more. That's what's crucial. The want to learn more is what's the most important part about studying history. That's what drives the whole thing. So you want to find what you want. If you want to learn about things like the way the cultures evolved in Southeast Asia, like that, go nuts, you can do that. If you want to learn about the way different crops in the New World affected the way that the Old World used them. Like tomatoes were a foreign concept to people in the Old World before 1500. Without the New World, there's no spaghetti. So it's things like that is like, if you want to learn history, you got to find your niche, you got to find what you're interested in. And if you want to go into AP classes, one crucial thing that I've been very lucky in, obviously so have you because you've been in the same classes as me, is to have great teachers who, for the most part, inspire you to learn history. They teach you the history, they teach you as much as they can, and they also make it fun to learn. And even though Davis and Melvin, for the most part, I mean, Melvin was a little bit different because he didn't really teach us the content, but the way that he went about explaining how things worked and the way he went about kind of helping us along was very entertaining and very fun. The way that Davis lectured was also very fun because he did it in a way where it made sense to us while also getting the point across. And he also made it, he did a lot of, what Davis did was he made a lot of comparisons from the past to today. Right. So this is like this happening today, and that engages the audience. It helps the people listening understand what's going on with a modern, because you're looking at it from a modern lens. So if you have a modern comparison, it's easier to understand.
Right.
So the bottom line is, if you want to get into history, you got to find what you want to know, and hope you have good history teachers.
Yeah, sort of. So thank you so much for joining us today,
Yeah, of
Parker.
course.
It's been fun, and
Yeah.
thank you for telling us about your story.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Hello, everyone. Also, one last thing I want to share is that my goal with this podcast is to share the stories of teenagers in Danville because sometimes kids' voices aren't heard. And as I interview people, it lets me and my viewers hear cool stories that sometimes weren't heard before.